most of us, if not all, have this idea that we are working so hard in our first business because we want freedom. Freedom is this beautiful thing we want, and it's financial freedom and time freedom and all of these things. But when we get that freedom, it's scary because you have too many choices. It's actually boring to have so much freedom. It's extremely confusing, and most people don't want any of that, and they escape too early. Those who were very successful in their post-exit journey, they actually persevere in not doing anything, and that's very hard for entrepreneurial types of people. But they persevere until they master their energy, they find their new purpose, and then they channel that energy towards that new purpose.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC10X podcast. We often hear stories of startups exiting for millions of dollars. There are TechCrunch articles written about it and LinkedIn posts with hundreds of likes on it. But something that doesn't get covered is what a founder goes through when their company is going through an exit. That's exactly what we plan to cover today with Anastasia Koroleva, a 4X exited founder and host of the Exit Paradox podcast. In this episode, we talk about Anastasia's story and about her 4 exited businesses. When should founders think about exiting the business? How much of the business to sell? The post-exit crisis faced by founders. How to handle the sudden flood of liquid wealth after an exit. How freedom is actually a scary thing. Should exiting the business be the ultimate goal for founders? And lots more. This episode can single-handedly save years of time and millions of dollars for founders listening. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast10X, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC10X, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you, from pre recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Anastasia, so good to have you on the VC10X podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. And I'm so excited to talk about all things exits. It's such an interesting topic to talk about from founder perspective, also from an investor perspective, and you yourself being a 4X exited founder. So tons of insights there. So to start things off, can we first have your story and what you've done? Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I actually started as a lawyer. I was an M&A lawyer working at the firm of Skadden Arps, looking at other companies being sold and merged into each other. And then I left the firm to join a small startup, which was a software as a service business. And we ended up growing it and to actually the largest in the world in its space. And we had a very good exit. We had no investments, so it was bootstrapped, the first one, which is interesting because we can go into that. We had some experience trying to raise money and then decided not to, and there are pros and cons about that. So that was the first exit. It happened 13 years ago. it had quite an unexpected effect on me, and we'll talk about it later if you like. But the second exit was of a company which I started while still having the first one. So it's not like I jumped right into starting a new company after the exit, but I switched full time into the second company before the first exit. And I sold that one a few years later. And then I was so confident and full of myself that I decided that now I know everything about anything. And I started two companies at the same time. And the most interesting thing happened with those two. I did end up selling them, but I sold them for personal reasons and way too early in their normal business history, because I got hit by this post-exit kind of crisis in my case. And I sold them for personal reasons because I realized that I need to create a little bit of space and smell the roses and kind of do what I should have done straight after the first exit. Again, I know you want to talk about it a bit later, the post-exit life. I'm happy to elaborate on that. But briefly, these were my four exits. I exited them for very different reasons, and the last two were for personal reasons. And that's when I took some time to process the whole experience, and I became quite an expert in it, I think, because I have now been doing it for 13 years. I created quite an interesting community of exited founders around me, and I've been writing about it. And I now, as you know, have a podcast too, Exit Paradox, where I interview exited founders because I think it's so important for others to hear their stories.
Totally. That's such an impressive story, from you founding a company and then selling it and then starting another one before selling it, actually, and moving to it full time. So you don't have any time in between to experience the post exit life and on the first exit that you had. And then automatically the second one starts and then you sell the second one. And then after the second exit, how was the feeling like? You must be feeling like a superhuman at that point. Okay, now I'm going to start two companies all at once. Like one at a time isn't enough for me. I'm going to do two, right?
Exactly. I did feel like a superhero, and I learned my lesson the hard way. Because really, what happened, and I find it really fascinating because most people don't expect that to happen, is my motivation changed. And it often happens in other people also quite some time after the first exit. It doesn't happen right away. But I completely lost my previous motivations, which were basically financial freedom. I wanted to be free and I wanted to have money, right? And then I didn't think that I would lose that interest, but I still didn't have new motivations. I just felt I wanted to understand what the hell is going on. Why am I not happy? Why things I expected to happen didn't happen? And I went into this kind of introspection journey to find my answers. But I was shocked by the fact that I was suddenly not motivated by my old motivators.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very interesting to learn how your motivations change as you move along in that journey, right? And when the exits happen. And can you give us a brief insight into what all these businesses were about and what type of businesses were these?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one was a B2B business, software as a service for medium and small size businesses. And we focus on business communications for those. And the second one was completely different, was B2C. We were solving a problem for millions of immigrants around the world. It was a very sort of global idea, ambition. And it was this dream product market fit when we launched the product, and then quite quickly it was discovered by people. Actually, the Indian community was our 90% of our customers at the time, and it grew to 15 million in revenue in 1 year without any marketing cost or any marketing effort, actually, by pure word of mouth. And we were just lucky because there is no sort of nothing we can attribute to our own skills or wisdom at that point. But it was a fantastic experience because it really taught me to look for that product market fit and to never even go ahead with any business without that, because I knew that it's possible. So in my future businesses, I became completely obsessed on a product market fit. I started other companies as well, not just this four, but I would stop them very quickly if I saw people didn't want them. And I'm very grateful for that experience, because otherwise I think I wouldn't be doing that. So again, I was lucky that way,
Yep.
and my third and fourth business did hit the product market fit um, quite early on, and I was very energized by it because I knew where it would be going. But again, as I mentioned before, I ended up selling them for personal reasons earlier than I should have for financial reasons, which is also okay. I never regretted it actually, because by that time my sort of motivations and desires changed quite dramatically.
Right, absolutely. And were all these businesses VC funded, or some of them were maybe bootstrap or self funded?
Well, I never had VC funding. We did have a period in
Right,
my first business when we were
right,
very serious about raising money, and it was the right moment in the company's history. And we actually had quite a dream bidding war because we had some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley bidding for the company. And it was our decision actually to walk away. We spent a year and a half trying to raise money, and then we looked back and realized that we actually prefer to sell. And also by that time, we have talked to so many advisors who would tell us, guys, you should probably consider selling the whole thing. So we
right,
ended up doing that at the end instead of raising money.
right. Yeah,
But it
that's
was a
super.
fun ride for a year and a half, getting to know the VC industry.
Yeah, totally, and that's very impressive how you achieved all of it. So you haven't raised any VC funding at all
No.
throughout all your four businesses, right?
No, in the first business, as I said, we tried and then we ended up selling, and we were
Right,
very happy with the outcome and the
right,
amount, especially given that we were bootstrapped. So we took quite a lot of money off the table, but at the same time, we were the company was bought by a private equity firm, which then sold it 10x 5 years later, and then we thought, oh, we must have missed something about the business that more professional people could see, which was also an amazing lesson in humility. But
totally.
it came later than I already started my next companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also something I've seen a lot of exited founders experiences, the post exit regret of selling the business. That okay, maybe I should not have sold it.
It's interesting because I'm not sure about regrets. Also, I'm still not sure whether if we
Right,
didn't sell, we would be able to achieve that outcome. Because to be fair, the private equity
right,
firm put a lot of knowledge and expertise and money into the business that
exactly.
we probably wouldn't
Very true.
have been able to. So
Yeah,
it's not fair to say that we shouldn't have sold. If anything, maybe we should have
totally.
kept part of the equity because we exited completely 100%. Maybe we should have
Right.
kept a little bit. But this is
Yeah,
also it's such a gamble because I've met so many people who regretted doing that because you have zero control of what happens to your company after it's sold. And in most cases, in my experience, actually, the companies do not succeed after they're sold, and mergers don't go well in most of the cases. So I do not necessarily have a clear position on whether somebody should keep part of the equity or try to exit at all. You never
right.
know. It's a gamble.
Totally, totally. And can you also tell us how far out in the journey of the business for all four of these businesses? Like how many years did you spend working on those businesses before you ended up exiting?
So the first one, which I didn't start, but I joined very early, its whole history was 14 years. It took a lot of time actually for that business to find that magic product market fit. It took a lot of experimenting, a lot of work, and then once it found it, it grew exponentially. It needed that business model experimentation for years to get there. And the second one, exactly as I already mentioned, was the opposite. It hit the product market fit very early on, so it took off very quickly. And the other two also were lucky in this sense, but they were very young when I sold them. Um, Again, not the right moment financially to sell at all.
Right. Right, totally. So maybe 1 or 2 years in the last two businesses,
Oh yeah, yeah.
something like
The
that.
last two were between 2 and 3 years in.
Okay, okay, got it, got it.
The
Awesome.
second one was actually 4 years in.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. So let's try to take a broad view of it. We have gotten your individual or personal journey with building businesses and selling them, and that's very impressive. Now let's get to sharing some learnings out of this entire journey, right? So when should founders start thinking about exits?
Uh, Well, that's a very interesting question because I think it has to be considered very, very carefully. And there are three factors that need to be seriously thought about. So, one is what the founder team's goals are for that business. I think if they're purely financial, like really cynically financial, then trying to build a business with an idea to exit it is not necessarily the best strategy because the likelihood of having a big exit statistically is very low. So, unless you are very sure that you have some um, special knowledge or some special circumstances that may bring you to that point faster or more likely than other businesses, it's not necessarily the best way to do it because you chances of building a very successful cash flow business statistically are higher. The second thing to consider after the goals is your personality. If your personality is such that you're just not driven by the idea of building a cash cow, then it's not a good idea to go that way because you will not have the required resilience and determination to build that business because you will not enjoy it. So the second thing is who you are. If you are the type of a business person who is driven by the idea of solving this problem, bringing in money, giving up control, whatever it takes to solve the problem and bring the company to the exit, then building that type of company is better for you, even if financially you understand that you're more likely to get rewarded for building a cash flow in business. So I think these are the most important things to consider.
Right, totally. And you tried raising VC the first time you were building a business, but then after that, in your subsequent businesses, you didn't even try raising VC, right? So,
Um, no, because for example, with
did
the
you?
first one,
Yeah.
we talked to Sequoia, which is sort of
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate dream
Right.
for
Totally.
founders, and we had an amazing experience with dealing with them. They're fantastic.
Okay.
But what
Okay.
happened is that they gave us a valuation which was lower than what other firms gave us. And they said,
Okay.
you know what? We know we can bring you unique value. So it's up
Right.
to you whether you want to accept a lower valuation because you believe we'll take you further or not. And at that
Okay.
point, we were very greedy. Our
Mm-hmm.
thinking was very small, and we're like, no way, we are going to accept a low valuation for some kind of
Right.
promise of help in the future. Since then,
Right.
I've gone back to that a few times because I thought maybe I was
Okay.
wrong. Actually, maybe I was just thinking too small. And then
Mm-hmm.
another firm which gave us much better valuation ended up changing the terms all the time during the process, and we ended up sort of not going with them because we felt they were not a good partner because they kept changing the terms all the time. So again, we were quite exhausted by the whole journey by the time we sort of were done with it, and we were ready to sell
Yep.
partially because we were exhausted by the whole process of raising venture capital. Also, the company produced so much healthy cash flow at that time that we uh, thought maybe, we were mostly doing it at that point in time for personal reasons. We wanted to take some money off the table.
Right.
And then we met this banker who told us, okay, if you want to take some money off the table and you're not really that excited about staying with the business, maybe selling it would be a better idea. And persuaded us to take that route. And then, of course, it was a question of strategic buyers versus private equity, which is a whole different story. We had to learn about that world.
Right. Absolutely. And in the subsequent businesses, did you consider VC or not at all?
If I considered VCs, no, I didn't because first of all, I was full of myself, as I mentioned, and I thought I didn't need all the complexities that come with having a VC partner on board. I still remember that trauma of spending a year and a half trying to raise money and then walking away from it. Maybe later in this company's journeys, in my third and fourth, I would be ready for it, but. No, again, I have nothing against the VC industry. I think it's fantastic, but I personally did not live through that experience of having a full cycle of being a
Right.
VC funded firm.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also depends from person to person and what type of company you're building and what's your personal choices, the personal choices of the founder. So it's very dependent on all those things. It's not black and white that okay, VC is bad and you should maybe self fund or you should self fund or maybe self funding is bad. You should do VC. I think different types of funding or approaches are suitable for different founders. That's all it is about, right? Awesome. And when you reach that stage of you knew that okay, I'm going to sell the business, that's the path I want to take, so how do you find the ideal buyer for the business? How did you approach that, and how can maybe other founders approach that?
Well, when you're exiting the business completely, and we were determined to not have any earnouts or anything like that, it becomes mostly about the money, the amount of money you get. And then, of course, there is another consideration: what actually happens to that company, or what's the likelihood of that company succeeding, because you can't help it, but you really care about your employees, about the brand, about what you've built. So for us, when we were selling, we also had three different buyers to talk to, and we ended up going with the one that made us by far the best offer financially, but also we were very comfortable that they would take a good care of the business, and they did. We were right; they were excellent in their job.
Right.
But
and
I don't
and
know if
so
there's such thing as an ideal buyer. An ideal buyer is the one who
okay,
completes and who lets you uh, have a all cash deal.
totally agree to that. And but when you were looking at the time when you were looking for the buyer, did you have a prospect, because you told us your experience about trying to approach LPs and for 1.5 years, and you were not very pleased with the offers made, and it didn't go through, right? And what was your experience with these buyers, or maybe on the PE side of things? How did you approach them? How long did it take, right? What were the good things that you did or bad things you should have avoided, things like that?
So the first buyers actually approached us because at that time we were visible enough. So they approached us, but we quickly realized that we were not in a very good negotiating position, because when you have just one interested party, they can dictate the terms. We also learned from the experience of raising capital for a year and a half that this process is so damaging and distracting for the business that we would only do it if there is a high likelihood of great outcome. We wouldn't just be talking to a potential buyer for the sake of talking to them. So at that point, we decided to hire a professional banker, and I'm very happy we did. I think it's very important. That solved two problems. One is he put us in a much stronger negotiating position, because we had very quickly we had a very exciting bidding war, which we did not expect would happen. And the second thing is that he took a lot of work onto himself and his own firm and away from us. So we were less distracted and we could actually focus on the business more.
Right, totally. So it was the investment banker who was in charge of the negotiating process, right?
Yeah. We had a good
Awesome.
legal team as well, and I
Right,
felt very strongly about it just because of my legal background. I wanted to have good lawyers on the team, and the banker was
right.
fantastic. So we were lucky with the team. And the other side, the
Hmm.
private equity firm behaved very ethically, which is also not a given in the industry. But the whole process with them, once they were chosen, was very good.
Absolutely. Right. So having the right lawyers by your side and having the right investment banker can make the process much
Yeah,
easier, and maybe, Yeah.
Yeah, I
Go
think
for it.
one thing that I'm happy we did is we had a separate lawyer representing us from the one representing our company. And that was our banker's strong recommendation. And it turned out to be very wise.
Okay. That's interesting. So tell me how that works. So there's a lawyer for you who is the
Yeah.
seller essentially, right?
So
Yeah.
psychologically, we as
Hmm.
most other founders, in my observation, thought of the business and us as one, especially because it was bootstrapped and we didn't have financial institutions as partners. So we felt that full ownership. So for us, the idea that we needed separate lawyers was completely crazy because we thought our interests were completely aligned. But the truth is, during the process, it's not always the case. And it's very important that you are being fair to the company and you have lawyers for the company and they're excellent and they represent the company. But you also have lawyers for yourself. And then they talk to each other and they find a fair solution for both sides. It was important.
Right, totally. And you just slightly touched upon the point in a previous answer about how much of the company to sell, right? You
Mhm.
obviously prefer to sell the entirety of it, but there's also a mandate that maybe you should keep 30%, 20%, some percentage of the company to keep tagging along with the business. So, and you've talked to a lot of exited founders who have had taken these different approaches while exiting, maybe owning some part of it and maybe not owning at all. So give us an insight into that and what's the
Yeah.
best approach maybe on that front?
I would say there are three types of paths in this sense. One is like ours, when we sold everything and we are happy we did. Even though the company later succeeded, there are no regrets because, as I mentioned, there is no guarantee we would have succeeded in a similar manner. Um, so we had a clean breakup. Psychologically, by the way, it's probably the hardest exit when you both um, get the money all at once and you lose any control or involvement with the company. It's very hard, but that's a separate question. But a second group of exits are where people have loan uh, earn-out provisions or they leave a lot of equity after the first exit. And the problem I see with those, and I have quite a lot of friends who went that path, is that people underestimate how much they would hate being employed. Because essentially that's what happened. They stay on board, they work with the acquirer, but they hate it. So, for example, a good friend of mine, Mikhail Roxon, he ended up um, breaking his contract, changing the contract, and leaving 4 million on the table just to be free, to buy himself 1 year of freedom. And if anybody told him, he's very public about it. That's why I mentioned his name. He gave me an interview on my podcast about this. So it's not a secret. But um, if anyone told him before that he would agree to leave 4 million on the table just to get a year of freedom, he would never believe it. But it's very hard to predict how much we change after an exit. Suddenly, our time becomes so much more important than money, so much more valuable that a year is absolutely worth that 4 million. So when I talk to people who haven't sold yet, I usually try to tell them that it's extremely important to appreciate the fact that you do not know what you don't know and you do not know how you're going to change. And generally, it's better to not have those long term commitments after you exit. But again, the situation is
Absolutely.
very different, and you may not be in a negotiating position when it depends on you. You may agree to the terms
Right.
you have to agree to. But generally, my observation is that people do not appreciate how valuable their time becomes after an exit. And they're willing to accept
Totally.
those provisions requiring them to stay on board for too long.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very interesting insight on that front because I think most M&A transactions and most deals where a founder is selling the business, they are required to stay on for at least maybe a 1 year or at the lowest maybe 6 month period to maybe help them transition the business from the hands of the seller to the acquirer, right? So that's a very interesting thing there.
Um,
uh
there is
yeah.
definitely another side, and I think it's important to mention it because,
Hmm.
yes, on the one hand, most people regret not having negotiated a clean breakup. At the same time, if you have a clean breakup, you have to appreciate how difficult the transition can be later on, because everything happens very suddenly. Like you lose your purpose, you lose your structure, you lose, your habits, your social network, everything. And on top of it, you suddenly have the challenge of managing wealth, which turns out to be quite a hard work and a steep learning curve for most founders. It's not actually as exciting as we think it would be.
Absolutely, totally agree. And a lot of things change in maybe the flip of a button, or maybe how you turn on a switch. That's how quickly everything changes. You're suddenly a lot more wealthier. You suddenly have a lot more time, and you suddenly don't have work if it's a clean breakup there, right? So, can you tell us what are the types of challenges that founders face after they
Mhm.
have exited?
Absolutely. There are definitely patterns, and those patterns, you can break them up into kind of two groups of exits, because exited founders belong to these two completely different groups depending on how they react to the exit. And the difference is whether they feel they got enough money out of the exit. And that is quite subjective. So, in my observation, yes, it's much easier to feel you got enough if you got more than, say, $100 million. It's easier psychologically to say, I've arrived, it's enough, I can move on. But I also met quite a lot of people who get significantly less than that, but they, for whatever reason, achieve that contentment, and they feel it's enough, and then they give themselves the permission to explore what else is out there in life and in the world. The second group, sometimes these people are a bit older, they would be more than 40 or 45, and also they just want to do something else in life. But there are lots of exited founders whose exits were not very big, and they're very young. And these people tend to really want to build another company, have a bigger exit, or invest right away in other companies. Like they're so full of this energy and momentum, and they want to keep going. So here's what happens. In my observation, the most financial mistakes happen in the first year by far, 90% plus. So that first year is when so many of us, and I made these mistakes too, use money to solve problems that cannot be solved with money. For example, in my case, I really suffered from the loss of identity. I felt left out. I was kicked out of tech startup ecosystem. I didn't know how to introduce myself and what to write on LinkedIn. So I decided, and I didn't understand it right away. It took me years actually to understand it. But I decided that if I can call myself an angel investor, my suffering will stop, and I'll feel this sense of belonging again, and I'll feel important again. So I started doing this angel investing for completely wrong reasons. So sure enough, financially it was a huge mistake. I lost a lot of money. But if only I waited a little bit longer and gave myself this time, I wouldn't feel that way, because all this initial shock of, oh, who I am now if I'm not the founder or CEO actually goes away. It doesn't last that long. It's just this initial shock. And also, there's this momentum. We work so hard for so many years, and then there's no more work. And then you get really, really bored. And then you persuade yourself that you absolutely have to start another company. And this is how it's the most common mistake in my observation, that people start a new company way too early. I did that as well. So angel investing and starting a new business too early before you've overcome your psychological issues are the biggest sources of uh, losses.
Totally, totally. That's very insightful. So, how do you recommend do founders who have exited the business spend that first year after they've exited? What should be on their mind? How should they, navigate that?
I like to call it the healing period, because what happens is that people tend to underestimate what kind of trauma building a business actually is. We get so used to pushing and suffering and sacrificing our health and everything. We just get used to it. It becomes our normality. But the reality is that our body, our brain, they are very, very tired. And our quality of decision is not the best. So it's very important to just give yourself a year or two to heal. I also feel that it's extremely helpful, like some people do that very well, uh, to go and explore what else is in the world while you're healing. So, in my experience, the people who overcome this post exit crisis most successfully are the ones that do those things. They heal, they just let go, they explore, they allow themselves to experiment with things like silent meditation or whatever it is, psychedelics, whatever it is that helps them get to know themselves better and to understand what else is out there in the world. Because then when they are ready to start that new business, if they decide to do that, their quality of decision will be much better because their state, their mental and physical state will be much better. But also they'll see so many different options. What often happens, and it really pains me to see it again and again, especially with younger exited founders, is that people get so scared and bored of this emptiness that they are trying to avoid it. And they're trying to avoid it by going back to the comfort zone. And interestingly, the comfort zone is exactly that pain and sacrifice of building a startup, because this is the only thing we know. So without processing this properly and appreciating that this is not a comfort zone for our health and mental health at all, people just jump there into that, back into that craziness and busyness just to avoid staying with themselves, introspecting, uh, exploring, because that's hard work. It's actually much easier to go with the momentum.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a very important point there, that pain and sacrifice is the comfort zone for successful founders, and especially successful founders, because that's what built the business, right? And moving away is really, really hard for them.
If we go
Go for it.
back to my 4 companies, and I mentioned before that
Hmm.
when I started the third and fourth at the same time, this is a brilliant example of a poor decision made before I took that time to heal and explore. And I closed them, even though it was a wrong financial decision for sure, not closed, but I sold them and then ended up not having them, um, sold them too early because the need to heal later hits you, because that momentum is gone, and suddenly you don't have the reserve of willpower and perseverance anymore. And then the third thing that happens is that your motivation is suddenly gone because you're no longer motivated by money. And then you're just sitting there and you have responsibility for your new team. You're building this business, but A, you're not motivated. B, you have no willpower. You're dead tired. And then what? And I see it again and again and again. And then many people keep going on for years and years. They really try to build that business. Sometimes they raise money with investors. But at the end of the day, if you're not motivated as a founder and if you're not hungry, it's not going to succeed. You'll just bleed a lot of money.
Right. Absolutely, totally agree on that front. But while that sounds very reasonable, what you're saying, that okay, the first year you should try and heal yourself and try to engage in experiences that help you heal, right? It can be travel, it can be meditation, or psychedelics, or different practices, right? But it's extremely, extremely hard for founders to engage in that because they feel that okay, this is not work. I'm not doing anything, right?
Yeah, it's
What am I
extremely
doing
hard.
now?
It's hard work
Yeah,
not to do anything. I absolutely
right,
agree.
right. Yeah, totally agree. Awesome, awesome.
Uh, so,
Okay.
so Prashant,
Yep.
just a quick note because
Sure.
I think it's very important. So most of us, if not all, have this idea that we are working so hard in our first business because we want freedom. Freedom is this beautiful thing we want, and it's financial freedom and time freedom and all of these things. But when we get that freedom, it's scary because you have too many choices. It's actually boring to have so much freedom. It's extremely confusing, and most people don't want any of that, and they escape too early. Those who were very, very successful in their post-exit journey, they actually persevere in not doing anything. And that's very hard for entrepreneurial types of people. But they persevere until they master their energy, they find their new purpose, and then they channel that energy towards that new purpose. But it's a lot of hard work. There is not enough guidance out there. Usually people who are successful, they become successful because they have some kind of very, very supportive structure. Like I found, for example, in the Indian community, the family and the culture are very, very good to support exited founders. This is where you find some of the most successful exited founder stories. Orthodox Jews are also very good at that. But most people who grew up in the Western world don't have the support structure to carry them through, and they just jump back into businesses, lose a lot of money, and there's a lot of confusion. There are lots of divorces and hurt children just because it's very hard to manage that freedom that we so much wanted to have and then don't know what to do with.
Yes, totally. Freedom is scary. We all want it, but when you get it, you realize, okay, maybe I didn't want this.
No, and you don't know what
Great.
to do with it, and then you make
Totally.
mistakes.
Hmm. Absolutely. And the other front of it, we have, I think, talked about what you do with your time post exit. Let's talk about what you do with this, you know, almost a flood of wealth that came your way, and you're now sitting on a lot of cash. What do you
Yeah,
do with it, right?
that is very interesting because it takes time to understand what wealth actually means. And it took me years to appreciate the wisdom of capital preservation. In the beginning, I thought I was very full of myself, overconfident. And I thought when I just talked to private bankers for the first time and they were telling me about like this 2-3% return, I just laughed at their faces because it was nothing comparing to how my business had grown before. So I decided I'll do it all by myself. And that's when I started angel investing. I started giving money to friends who were running businesses. I was trading. I lost so much money just because I did not appreciate how difficult it is to manage money and how easy it is to lose it. But later, when I learned more about it by making my own mistakes, I realized that it is extremely important to plan for capital preservation, ideally before your exit, and just not invest yourself for a while, at least not until this emotional roller coaster is over, and it takes time. We need to let these emotions run their course, and not until we learn how to invest. It's actually very, very difficult for entrepreneurs to even understand an investor mindset because it's so completely different. Most of the habits we develop while building businesses are exactly the opposite of what is required for successful investments. Our personalities are exactly the opposite. Um, I, for example,
Yeah.
learned to respect people who are natural in investing, and I now just understand that I'll never be as good as they are. I'll never be as interested in investing as they are, and I'd rather trust them and pay additional fees to them just because I
Right.
know that I will never do better. Um,
Right.
so
Totally.
learning to respect people with a different set of talents is a very important thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree to that. I've talked to both types of people on the podcast, and I know these are certainly very different archetypes, and being an investor and being a founder, right?
It's one of the reasons why it's so important to take the time to understand yourself better, because once
Mm-hmm.
you've taken that time, you can appreciate whether you are more of a creative person or an investor. And if you're a creative person, chances are that your path to create more value and to have bigger impact and contribution in the future will come from your creativity. And if a creative person decides to work full time to manage their assets, they are actually damaging their chances of both continued financial success and having a meaningful life. At the same time, somebody who is an investor and, for example, reach that exit because they had creative partners along the way, their situation is very different. They may be better off focusing on investing themselves as opposed to delegating it. So I'm definitely a creative type, and I learned it the hard way. And I cannot turn into a good investor ever.
Yep. Yeah, great insights. So just to summarize the answer, so one is that that investors and founders are very different as individuals, and you should probably be investing maybe as an LP and letting someone else manage your assets who's better at you than you.
Mhm.
And the other is that you need to have that cool off period before you do any of it, right?
Mhm.
So that you let those emotions settle. And talking about the cool off period, because of what I've learned from your podcast is that that cool off period can actually last maybe over a decade. So tell us more
Well,
about that.
no,
How long does this
yeah.
post exit hangover last? Yeah.
So statistically, this post-exit crisis, which is not necessarily a crisis for everyone, but this post-exit period takes 10 years, a decade, which always shocks people because most think, oh, a month or two and I'm fine. At the same time, one of the exercises intellectually that I've been doing in the past few years, I've been trying to understand, is it possible to shorten that period? Because I think it's a tragedy that exited founders who are some of the most competent people in the world, and they've proven to be very competent in their ability to create value and solve problems for the humanity, they get stuck for a decade in some kind of emotional limbo and they can't move on, or they lose all that wealth that they uh, received from their own work, and they deserve to have. They lose all of that. They lose the energy. They lose a decade of their life, which where they could be creating value on dealing with post exit emotions. So I'm now absolutely sure that it's possible to go through that period faster. But if you want to go through that period faster, but also in a successful way, you have to be determined to do quite a lot of work. It's not easy. And some of that work is very counterintuitive. For example, not jumping into the next business, even though you really want to, but but taking the time to do the hard work. So the cool off period itself doesn't need to be a decade, not at all. It just takes a decade for people to often fix the mistakes they make in the first year or two because they don't have a cool off period. Yeah, if you do
Yeah.
things in the right order, you can go through
Yeah.
this much in a much smoother and faster way. And the right order in my book is you take that time to just heal, and
Right.
then you take the time to educate yourself and to do introspection and to
Right.
also think about the basic concepts. Like we have to understand that our definition of success changes, our definition of freedom changes, our motivation changes. We need to rebuild our Maslow pyramid to make sure that we have enough stability in our life before we move on. People who do that then jump into a completely different, much higher level of success, both financially and on a personal level, and build those fulfilling lives and are much happier. That's my observation so
Abs-
far.
yeah. Yeah, totally. And your observation is important because you are not yourself, not just yourself, an exited founder, a 4x exited founder, and you have interviewed multiple exited founders. So you certainly know what happens after exit. And if a founder is listening to this episode, I think you're super lucky because I think Anastasia is going to single-handedly save around 8-9 years of your life if you go by what she is suggesting on this episode. Have that cool off period and all the advice he's giving, right? And another thing that is observed is that a lot of founder, although they get a lot of wealth after the post exit,
some of them actually lose that wealth. Their wealth, their total wealth over time after the exit
Yeah.
tends to go down and not up,
Yeah.
right? Why does that happen? And if you have any stories on that front, that'd be appreciated as well. But how do founders avoid that?
I have lots of stories like that. I think generally the chances of our wealth going down after an exit are much higher. And that is exactly uh, because people don't do things in the right order. They jump into spending money or making investment decisions too early. So that banker who helped us sell the first company, he actually told us not to touch our money in the first year. And of course, we didn't listen, but we should have. Now I tell everyone the same thing. It's better to not touch it. And if when I talk to newly exited founders, they give me 10 reasons or more why they absolutely have to make some compelling investment. why it's so safe and so lucrative. But the truth is that um, we have these wrong ideas, wrong expectations of how investment world works. And in reality, just not losing money is a fantastic outcome. And a good friend of mine and mentor, Michael Sonnenfeld, who is the founder of Tiger 21, he has this famous 2% rule. And the 2% rule is that we should not spend more than 2% of our net worth ever in a year. The reason being is that then we only need to earn 2% a year on average to not lose money. For people who just sold, especially fast growing tech companies, this mentality is impossible to understand. But it is so true. And those who are disciplined, who follow this rule, they don't lose money because it's a very disciplining rule. But very few people do. So those who manage to have enough willpower to not give money away, not spend it, not run after some huge unrealistic returns while they're going through an emotional roller coaster, they have a chance of not wasting their exit wealth. But these are very few because it's hard and it's against our personality because most entrepreneurs like the thrill of a risk. We are adrenaline junkies. And we are often full of them of ourselves, like I was, because we just had a successful exit. We think we know better than others.
Totally. I agree to that. And coming to the last main question before we go for the close, and this is the big question: should exiting the business be the goal, or building a business that can run on its own and build a legacy?
Again, it's a question where three things need to be considered. One is you need to be realistic about what exit wealth actually means. It sounds so cool if someone has, an exit of, I don't know, $20 million. But if they spend 10 years getting there and then they have to invest very conservatively, receiving only 2% or 3% of that wealth in order to make sure they don't lose it, suddenly the idea of getting to that exit is not necessarily that exciting. So I think everybody needs to consider very carefully whether becoming very wealthy necessarily means a big exit. Or you can become very wealthy by focusing on building a business which is more of a cash cow, but will never be sold. For example, a friend of mine, just to give you a story, because it's happening right now, a friend of mine got an offer for his business of $50 million, and he's very happy. He thinks it's so cool. He's very excited. But he gets 10 million a year in cash flow from that business right now. And the business grows 5 to 10% a year. And his prediction is that for at least 10 years, the industry he is in will keep growing. So when I heard that, I told him there is absolutely zero reason for you to sell that business because once you've sold it, you'll never get this level of return while having control of the business. Also, on top of it, he spends maybe 4 hours a week if he feels like it, managing it, because he built such a brilliant, perfect cash flow business that he has reliable people doing everything for him. So the last conversation I had with him, I said, listen, you are just a spoiled brat. You have no appreciation for what you have, and that's your problem. But he cannot he's very young, very, very active, and he wants that big exit. And I think this is a very, very dangerous trap, because I can see what's going to happen. He'll sell the business, and then his bankers will tell him, okay, now you have to be satisfied with 2-3% return. And that's not what he's used to.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like you coming him to save him. Hopefully, he listens and agrees to you, because he has built a brilliant business, and it's not easy to build that kind of a business
Of course
at that
not.
scale. Yeah, and then giving it away for 5x the current revenue, it's doesn't make sense if it's a growing business and you are not extremely involved in it, right? Just 4 or 5 hours, I think, in a day, or maybe a week, I think that's very doable. And I think you get to retain all the benefits of running a business while having the life that you want, basically, right? You can still
Yeah.
live that life. So
Yeah,
yeah, totally.
exactly. Because one of his illusions that he does not
Right,
see is that he says,
right.
"I want to sell this business to completely stop thinking about it. So I want to focus on fulfillment, on my young children, on my family." And I keep telling him that's not going to happen, because once you have your own wealth to run, you suddenly realize you actually have to build a new business. Essentially, you have to learn things that you don't know about how to manage your wealth. You have to take the risk of trusting other people, um, running you this wealth machine of yours, and the whole thing will slow down. And what's going to happen, and happens a lot, is that people actually work even harder after they exit, just because they need to learn how to manage their wealth. And then they're very unhappy because they keep making mistakes. They feel bad about themselves. So I think there are lots of arguments to support the idea of building a business that will be creating a lot of healthy cash flow. Having said that, I just want to repeat what I said before. If your personality is such that you cannot get excited about this type of business, it's just not your thing, then most likely you will not be able to build that. If your prime motivator is selling, um, building a company that solves a particular problem, or your core skills, which is another important factor, your core skills are such that you're very likely to build a business that can have a big exit quite quickly. This is also important to consider. So there is no rule for everyone. You have to think about what your core competence is, what your personality is, and what your goals really are, and be very honest with yourself. If you're lucky to
Right.
have that choice, because we're talking usually about the luxury of sitting there and dreaming about what kind of business I want to build. But more often than not, people start businesses without this luxury by just jumping at an opportunity or joining a team. Um, but if you are building and planning a business from scratch, it's very important to think through these three things, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. I think most of the founders start out the journey thinking that one day they're going to get this beautiful exit and life is going to be all rosy after that, not knowing there are different challenges on the other side which they are unaware of.
Mhm.
And this episode does a splendid job in trying to bring those challenges to the forefront, and once they are aware of these challenges, maybe think better about what's the approach they want to take, right? And what kind of person they are, and what mistakes they should avoid, right? So this has been an incredible episode. Yeah, go on.
So yesterday, you just made me think about something by your comment. So yesterday, I
Sure.
interviewed someone for my podcast, and it was the first
Right.
time when a person asked to stay anonymous. I hope to release it next week. It's my first anonymous interview, and he said he wanted to stay anonymous because that would allow him to be very, very honest. And then he delivered. He was extremely honest in the podcast. But the reason it's relevant to what you're saying is that at some point he said, my net worth is $100 million. And I am very, very unhappy But I know that if I tell someone out there that I have $100 million and I'm unhappy, they will immediately say, oh, come on, just give me that 100 million and I'll show you how to be happy. And he says, I promise you, you will not be able to show me how to be happy because you have no idea what happens when you get that $100 million and what kind of problems you suddenly have and how your psychology works. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating that he was so honest about it. So when people are
Right.
dreaming about an exit, they don't actually know what they're dreaming about. Yes, it's fantastic. It's great to have $100 million. There's no question about it. But it's important to understand it's not happily thereafter. It's just a different set of challenges you're having at that point, and that's okay as
Right.
long as you know it's not a happily thereafter.
Right. Totally. And I think there was a study done on this, that how much is money or wealth connected to happiness? Do they correlate all the way to the up as your wealth grows, right? And it was observed that they do correlate up until a certain point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that point may be around 10 million or something around that, but can be different for different people. But
It is.
beyond a certain point, it doesn't go up as your wealth grows. It probably grows down or flattens at that point. So your money and your happiness are not exactly correlate throughout. So that detachment of those two is very crucial, right?
Prashant, I'm very happy that you mentioned this because
Yeah.
my observation is that there is an interesting exception from that rule. But because that exception is so rare, uh, people don't talk about it. And the exception is very specific. There are people who understand that there is this post-money life when you are chasing other things. It's fulfillment, it's energy, it's happiness. If you learn how to use your wealth as leverage for those things, then yes, money will help you because it will be leverage for further happiness. The trick is that most of us don't do that, right? It does require effort. It requires personal growth and very particular personal growth because then we're talking about spiritual growth. And spiritual growth is a very different type of growth than the personal growth we go through as founders, for example, when we're trying to acquire skills. Spiritual growth requires uh, acquiring wisdom and oftentimes rethinking some of our core concepts and focusing on developing our virtues and becoming better people. And that's hard work. We're not trained to do that in the West. But those people who do that, and then on top of it, they have leverage to support, uh, for example, wealth and reputation and connections to support that growth, that happiness keeps growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about knowing how to use your wealth on different stages in your
Yeah.
life. So on the initial stage,
Mm-hmm.
it's about security, then it's about financial freedom, but then it's
Mm-hmm.
about it being leveraged for your purpose, your impact, your contribution, and spiritual growth.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Awesome, Anastasia. This has been a great episode. Probably one of the best we have done on a very important topic of exits. I think every founder and even every VC is very excited about exits, and this is going to be a very interesting episode for them to listen. Thank you for coming on. Can you let us know where can our listeners follow you, and also where can they find your podcast and listen more such stories?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and my website is exitparadox.com, and my podcast is called Exit Paradox. And thank you so much for letting me be on your platform and talking to your audience. I really appreciate it. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure hosting you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Bye.